What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Tastes Like Music. Jason and Joe here, coming at you with a deep dive. If you've never seen us do one of these before, basically, we spend a couple months listening to as much music as we can from a given year, and then we come to you with our top 25 albums and top 25 songs of that year. Back at the beginning of the channel, we did an Albums of the Year series where we picked our 5 favorites. We felt like that didn't cover enough of the stuff that we like, and we didn't get to talk about as many records as we wanted to. Plus, we wanted to explore some things that we didn't already know. So that's the point of this series, to go a little deeper. 1984, gotta say, not a big fan. Pretty much everything in this year that I like, I had already heard. I dug and dug to try to find new different things, and I didn't find much. I think only 2 albums that I had not heard before got the 4-star treatment from me. So kind of a dud year for me. But I guess that said, I'm going to go first. You have anything to say generally about 84 before we dive in?
I'll talk more about it in my video, but I agree that it's heavy at the top. I won't dispute that, but I found a lot of good albums. But yes, I was slightly disappointed that there weren't more undiscovered great albums. It seemed like everything that's great about 84 has been well documented.
All right. So for the first time ever, I've got some 3.5s in my top 25. Kind of a Kramzer move, but I tried my best. I couldn't find anything else to get to the 4 mark. 3 of them, in fact, 3.5s to start off my list. And the bottom of my list is so weird. I know it's weird. These are not things that are on most people's lists. My number 25 is No Brakes by John Waite. Not a cool pick. And to be fair, it's only a 3.5. I'm not trying to say it's like an amazing album, but I think John Waite's a very good singer. I think people know that from our Babies deep dive. I pushed for that deep dive and I enjoyed it more than most people. I think he can do pop and rock equally well. I think Missing You is one of the best ballads of the 80s. Dark Side of the Sun, I think, is awesome and has a great chorus. He covers a Peter Criss song, the song Tears, which was the second single from the record, written by Kiss guitarist Vinnie Vincent. So shout out to the A&R person who pulled that song from obscurity. And it's just a really solid AOR record. Nice production, big hooks, great voice, enjoyable listen. Number 25, 3.5 stars. Number 24 is Neil's Heavy Concept album by Neil. This is this is a real weird one. This is a comedy record from the UK. It's a mix of spoken word bits and songs. Some of the songs are comical, and some of them are just like straight covers. He does Traffic and Donovan and Pink Floyd. Production and keys is done by Dave Stewart of the Canterbury scene of the band Egg and of the band Con and other bands. You also have members of Gong, Spooky Tooth, and Level 42 playing on the record. There's some legitimately cool music on this album, and like the weird Neil character that is on top just gives it like this bizarre, surreal layer. The highlight of the record for me is the song Lentil Nightmare, which is a Black Sabbath pastiche narrated by Stephen Fry. It's just such a weird record, and I found myself kind of drawn to it. So 3.5 for Neil's Heavy Concept album. My number 23 is My Kind of Country by Reba McEntire. I always make a point to check out some country each year that we deep dive. 80s, not the best time for country in my book. The production on almost all country in this decade is pretty rough, but I think Reba comes through with, a really authentic, kind of traditional sound. Not crazy about the bass sound on this record, but overall, really for this time period, this is about as good as you can do with country. I think she's a great singer, of course, and there's a really good selection of songs on this record. She does covers from writers like Harlan Howard and Farron Young and Fred Carter Jr. and just classic country stuff. So yeah, even at 3.5, still my favorite country record of the year. All right. Moving on to my 4-star albums. Here we go. Number 22 for me is Sparks, Pulling Rabbits Out of a Hat. I don't think this is really a very highly or well-regarded Sparks album. I think the problem that I think a lot of people have with it is that it's a little like too mainstream pop. It loses a little of their like Sparksy quirks. And I think some of that kind of their personality is maybe a little softened here, but I just think it has some really good catchy tunes. Love Scenes is great. I think that should have been a single. I think it's the obvious hit here. The fact that they didn't make that the single, I think, was probably the record's downfall. But that said, I like Progress a lot. The spoken word delivery and those synth stabs in the chorus, I think, are awesome. I just thought it was like a fun, accessible record. I liked it more than Number One in Heaven, which we listened to for our Album of the Week series on Discord. And I think that's probably sacrilege among Sparks fans, since that's like their groundbreaking Giorgio Moroder record. But yeah, this one I just thought was more fun, more catchy, better hooks. I probably don't like this one quite as much as the 82 record, Angst in My Pants, though. Number 21 is Dreamtime by The Cult. I love The Cult, especially their early albums. I don't think they get enough credit for having a really unique sound, really unique aesthetic. I think at their core, they're like a hard rock band, but they pull in all kinds of like post-punk, college rock, goth influence. I think Ian Astbury, one of my favorite voices from the 80s. Billy Duffy writes really cool guitar parts. He's kind of like the Peter Buck or Johnny Marr of hard rock. A lot of cool like single note lines that he comes up with. The rhythm section is great too. A lot of like tribal pounding drum parts. If you listen to A Flower in the Dirt, like, and ask yourself, like, how would this band eventually like tour and open for Aerosmith? It makes no sense. They have like this really like unique space that they occupy in rock history. So yeah, I dig that. The Cult. My number 20 is self-titled album by Box of Frogs. This is a really cool rock record, has a very 80s sound, but in a really organic way. I think for a bunch of musicians from, the 60s and 70s, people who had been around a while, I think they come to this like very 80s aesthetic in a much better way than most of their contemporaries. The core band here is essentially all of the least famous members of the Yardbirds. Paul Samuel Smith, Jim McCarty, Chris Dreja. Vocals by John Fiddler of the band Medicine Head. He was also in British Lions, which was an offshoot of Mott after Mott broke up. But you also have Jeff Beck guesting on 4 tracks, Ray Majors of Mott, killer guitar solo on the track Harder. Rory Gallagher shows up, plays slide guitar on a couple tracks. So it's a cool record, kind of like walks the line of like, great playing, but also being like really slick and commercial sounding. So that one's cool. If you don't know it, check it out. Number 19, I've got Aural Sculpture by the Stranglers. This is their 8th album and probably safe to say their most commercial sounding to this point in their career. Their label rejected the original version of this record. They brought in Laurie Latham to produce, and Laurie Latham brings in like horns and makes the sound a lot poppier. But I think it's a really good facelift for the Stranglers at this point in their career. Ice Queen's a great opener. Skin Deep, I think one of my favorite songs of the 80s now since the listography that we did. Hugh Cornwell feels like he's like really becoming a much more self-assured front person on this record as well. So yeah, Aural Sculpture, kind of a nice discovery from a couple years ago on the channel.
Some interesting ones. The Box of Frogs, I thought it was weird. If upon hearing it, I would not think that it would be an album that you would like because it is very 80s sounding. I was like, oh, this is too 80s for Jason. I don't know if I liked it, but I did listen to it the other day. It's weird seeing you with Stranglers in your top 25 because that doesn't seem like a Jason core band at all, but it seems like you've taken a shine to them since the discography. They keep popping up for you.
That was my pick too. That was Jace. I picked the
Yeah.
Stranglers. So.
Jason. Other than that, I didn't listen to the Cult one. I probably should have. I like My Kind of Country by Reba McEntire.
All right, forging ahead.
Not terrible.
Here we go. Number 18. The big question mark for a lot of people, would this still hang out in my top 25? It does. It's number 18. It's The Unforgettable Fire by U2, a band that I famously am not a fan of, but we did the deep dive. This was their lone record to get to 4 stars for me. So people were wondering, would I demote it to 3.5 to keep it out of my top 25? I couldn't. There was nothing else here in this year. It had to stay. So yeah, there's a couple records in my 84 list. Actually, when I think of the artist and think of them generally, like their entire body of work, I would say that I don't really like them. And U2 is one of them. I don't really like U2, but I think this particular record, I think it is pretty solid. It's really good. I legitimately love A Sort of Homecoming and Bad, two of my favorite U2 songs. And I think this is like the perfect moment on their trajectory of popularity where they could feel big and epic without feeling too self-important yet, which I think when that starts to happen is kind of like an ongoing problem for them. But this is like right before that moment. And yeah, some of the songs here are just like really big and epic, and they have that kind of like wide open soaring feeling to them. So yeah, they hang in there. Number 18. Number 17, I've got Couldn't Stand the Weather by Stevie Ray Vaughan. It's my favorite Stevie Ray Vaughan record. I think it nails the sound and the production here, a little fuller, a little more oomph than Texas Flood, the debut. I think it's a perfect sound for a blues rock crossover. And of course, Stevie was a huge part of the 80s blues revival. Stevie's playing in tone, stellar as always. His voice is excellent and underrated. The title track, Voodoo Chow, Cool Shot, all radio staples. But then you also get other stuff like Tin Pan Alley and Stang Swang, show off some other sides of his playing. Scuttle Button, electrifying way to open the album. Even with all like the insane players that you like see on Instagram or wherever you see them, YouTube nowadays, these prodigies, Stevie Ray Vaughan's playing is still electrifying, which is an impressive thing to do when you're just, playing blues. But yeah, something about his feel and his tone and just the way he plays is really kind of magnetic. Number 16, I have A Pagan Place by the Waterboys. Just mentioned the Waterboys in our Emmylou Harris video the other day, which was played an album of the week by Eric. Eric also played This Is the Sea by the Waterboys, which I love some of the songs, and The Hole of the Moon is like an incredible tune. I love that song. But the production on that record, I think, holds it back. This record doesn't have an outright banger like The Hole of the Moon does, but I think it's more consistent, and I think it has a much better sound to it. Yeah, I mean, overall, it's not a terribly different sound, but it's just not quite as washed in reverb. It's a little earthier, a little richer. This is also the first record of theirs with Carl Wallinger, who just passed away. So rest in peace to him. I really like Mike Scott as a songwriter. I like him as a singer. I think he has a really unique voice. Not quite sure yet if I like this or Fisherman's Blues more. Probably Fisherman's Blues, but this is a solid runner-up to have in your discography.
All right, it's going along pretty good. None of these records I dislike. And a couple in common so far. Not as many as I was expecting, but there's still time. I have a feeling these top 15 or so are going to be a little more obvious picks.
Yeah, my top 10, I bet we have like 8 of those in common or something. So yeah, all the in commons are yet to come. My number 15 is one that maybe we could have in common. It'll be interesting to see if this makes the perhaps lower reaches of your list. I've got Perfect Strangers by Deep Purple. This is the reunion of the Mark II lineup, the classic Deep Purple lineup, Machine Head, In Rock. It's the first Deep Purple record of any form in 9 years since Come Taste the Band with Tommy Bolin, Glenn Hughes, and David Coverdale. I think it's an awesome updating of the Deep Purple sound. For sure sounds like an 80s rock album, but with the unmistakable Purple feel. Ian Pace's drumming is so good. Everyone's on top of their game. Blackmore's solo on the opening track, Knocking at Your Back Door, is just on fire. It's so good. And it's just got some, 80s rock bangers. Knocking at Your Back Door, like I said, the title track, or just epic album openers. Maybe like I'm trying to think of like another record that has a side A and a side B opener that's like as strong of like they feel like opening songs. Not only are they just good, but they just feel like openers. I don't know. I think it's everything anyone could have wanted from a Deep Purple reunion in 1984. So yeah, I like that one a lot. All right, my number 14 is another album from Jaskis. It is Swoon by Prefab Sprout. Like I said, another band we deep dived on the channel. Such a cool, interesting, unique band. Paddy McAloon, I think a true original songwriter. This is their debut, and like I wouldn't say they're fully formed here, but they're close. I think on subsequent records they get a little more catchy and accessible. This one's a little harder to unpack. I think it's a little more musically challenging. They're using a lot of like jazzy chords, but it's worth the bit of effort to get into it. The great playing here, really interesting writing. I love Green Isaac. I never played basketball now. The bass playing on the record from Martin McAloon is exceptional. You get the male and female vocal interplay. Just a really cool band and a really interesting debut. My number 13 is also a debut album. It is the self-titled album from The Smiths. This is their second attempt at recording this record. The first one got scrapped. I guess they were recording in like a basement. It was so hot and the instruments were going out of tune because of the heat and humidity or whatever. So this went to number 2 on the UK charts. I think it's an excellent debut. I don't think it's the peak of the Smiths, but it does have everything that you would come to love from the Smiths. I think, the great tunes, Morrissey's lyrics, Johnny Marr's guitar playing, incredible rhythm section, great bass lines from Andy Rourke, some great songs, This Charming Man, What Difference Does It Make, probably the standouts. I also love Reel Around the Fountain, which I think was actually the one that made my top 10 during Smith's week. Yeah, just that part where he says 15 minutes with you, that chorus I think is really, really strong. I love the drum beat on that song too, really simple, really steady, and for something so basic, it's somehow really distinct as well. So maybe not the last time we talk about the Smiths on my list. Number 12 for me is Grace Under Pressure by Rush. They pushed the synths even further up front than they were on the previous record, Signals. More new wave influences, especially the Police on this record coming through big time. Alex Lifeson would eventually complain about the synths taking up all this space, but I think the synths actually do on Signals and this record especially kind of force him to come up with some like different types of guitar parts that I think actually sound great and are really cool and really interesting guitar parts. Neil's lyrics, I think, are really interesting on this record as well. Very thematic, maybe one of their most thematic records from start to finish. It's super tuneful as well, really catchy songs, and of course they're always prodigious playing. Some Rush fans don't like this era, and I've never really understood the Rush fans that don't get behind the synths. I think they did some of their most interesting work in the 80s. And for anyone who doesn't like Rush because they can't get with the major progginess of like Hemispheres or something, and if you've never given the 80s stuff a chance, I would urge people to check out a couple of these records, because I think a lot of people would be surprised at how accessible, and they're not really as much as they're playing kind of beyond what a lot of like normal pop players would play. I don't think it's really that hard to grasp, and it's not really like noodly or overdone. So, all right, 11, back to the Smiths. Hatful of Hollow. This is their other release from 84, not an official studio album. It's pulled largely from BBC Radio 1 performances and several of their more recent singles and B-sides. Few songs on this record are repeated from the debut. And I think those songs that appear in both places, I think they're a little more lively here. I think the new studio stuff is great, the singles, and really show their growth from the debut. Heaven Knows I'm Miserable Now, How Soon Is Now, I think on their own are enough to kind of elbow this ahead of the debut. It's just a really strong collection. Usually we don't include these kind of like compilations and things. We did include it in their discography, listography. I just think this and Louder Than Bombs are kind of essential to the Smiths catalog. So there it is, number 11. Top 10. Number 10 is Knife by Aztec Camera. This is the highest placing new listen for me. Really like this record, and actually upon revisiting it, it's growing on me even more. So shoving its way into the top 10. This is a Scottish band led by songwriter Roddy Frame. Notably, this record's produced by Mark Knopfler. It doesn't sound super Mark Knopfler-y to me. It's kind of interesting that he is the producer here. But there is kind of like this sophisticated pop sound that I guess is a little Dire Straitsy, but it's really unique. It's a unique record. It does actually remind me a good bit of Prefab Sprout. The songwriting, the way the songs are arranged. Yeah, I don't know. I was just kind of impressed with the vision and the execution here. I think the writing's great. The arrangements are excellent. I love the horns on the song Head is Happy. There's just like a real economy of sound here. Even though the songs are wordy, he's like packing them in, and I don't know, the way that the songs are built around his lyrics work really well. So a strong 4 stars for that one. All right, number 9, an artist that we will be covering soon-ish on the channel, maybe in a couple months. I've got Purple Rain by Prince. And admittedly, I'm a bit of a Prince novice. I think I've heard everything through the 80s at some point, but I haven't listened to those records a lot. That said, this album is great. I saw this movie in theaters when he died. Probably my favorite movie going experience of all time. It was like being at a concert. It was packed and people were singing along, and it was a lot of fun. It's just like a pop record with no holes in it, which is rare, especially like a blockbuster type of pop record. And every song just hits, from what I know of his previous work, this seems to just like boil it down to its essence. It's more concise, it's more palatable to a mass audience, but without really sacrificing his artistic integrity, his artistic vision. You still get some raunchy stuff like Darling Nikki, musicianship, arranging, production, all excellent, really focused. And yeah, excited to get the full Prince picture soon.
I didn't see Aztec Camera coming. That's one of those. There's so many of those like synth pop bands that I just pretty much ignored this year. It didn't seem like a lot of them were as good as they were in '82. So I kind of just like, you know what, I'm not finding any of these that interesting. So I don't even remember if I listened to that one or not. I may have, but it didn't leave much of an impression if I did.
If you didn't, I think you would maybe like it. It is kind of prefabby.
Good to see the Smiths on there. I didn't think both would make it, but
Yeah.
it's good. I guess it had to. I guess that you had the Smiths at 4 stars on the discography. So by by process of elimination, I should have realized that. And yeah, a lot of albums that will be appearing on my list here.
All right, number 8 is my highest 4-star album. And shockingly, it's Bruce Springsteen, Born in the USA. This is the other artist I was referring to when talking about U2, an artist in totality that I would not call myself a fan of, although I am a fan of like 3 or 4 of his records, and I think he's got a handful of really great records, and this is one of them. I love the sound of it, the big 80s sound, but like evoking wide open spaces and Americana. That's kind of like the definition of Heartland rock. Great mixing on it by Bob Clearmountain. It sounds fantastic. Tons of hits. You get the title track, Cover Me, Glory Days, I'm on Fire, Dancing in the Dark. But almost all of the other stuff is really great too. Darlington County is great. No Surrender. Bobby Jean was the one that was like really hitting me this time as like the deep cut that I was into. It's pretty much all killer. It's just Bruce at pretty much like another peak of his songwriting and getting the sound right and the production right, and yeah, it just all works. Now we're going up to 4.5. And we're going to start that off with my only live album entry, and it is Stop Making Sense by Talking Heads. The film, the movie, is 5 stars. Probably my second favorite concert film of all time behind The Last Waltz. But as great and as energetic as it is, I'm probably more likely to go to their studio versions of if I'm like just listening. I think the visuals are such a big part of this record or of the movie. That said, it's still a ton of killer songs in one place by a band that I like a lot at the top of their game. Tina Weymouth, I think, shows why she should be considered one of the all-time great bassists ever throughout this performance. The expanded band with the other players is killer. David Byrne is magnetic, just fantastic, fantastic live album. So that's number 7 at 4.5. Number 6 is 1984 by Van Halen. I had this at 4.5 from our early dive on the channel of Van Halen. And I was looking at it compared to like some of the other things around it. And I was like, I don't know if I can put this ahead of all of my 4s. So I was like, I might need to drop that to 4 stars. So I gave it a listen, and it's just like impossible to deny. Like, it's so well done. Like, I might not listen to this as much as a lot of my 4s, but it's like undeniably just so solid. It sounds so good. It's like the perfect confluence of rock and pop. And they always had that pop edge to them, but this like really streamlines it even more. I love the drum sounds on this record. I think they're really unique. Produced by Ted Templeman. The application of the synths is really unique as well. They don't really sit in the mix the way most 80s synths do. They're like on top of the mix like a guitar. Yeah, it's just a different sounding record. It sounds great. It sounds huge. And I will also say, I think the synth thing is majorly overstated. It's kind of like when people call Dynasty by Kiss their disco record, even though there's like one disco song, maybe two, arguably. This really only has 2 songs that have prominent synth on it, which are Jump and I'll Wait. Everything else has little to no synth. People like, what's the big deal? People need to relax a little about like, especially back then, like people were so offended by synthesizers. It's ridiculous. Sadly, the end of the David Lee Roth years, but really went out on top. Not quite top. I still prefer the debut, but great record. Top 5. And I believe, I didn't check, but I think they're the same top 5 that I had originally. My number 5 is going to be Learning to Crawl by the Pretenders. I think it's pretty obvious that the Pretenders were a better band with James Honeyman Scott and Pete Farndon. But given the circumstances, I think Chrissy and the band do an incredible job here. Chrissy just kind of dusting herself off and going to work and just writing some of the best songs that she ever wrote in her career. You've got a few different lineups appearing on the record. You've got Billy Bremer of Rockpile and Tony Butler of Big Country on Back on the Chain Gang and on My City Was Gone. Andrew Bodner of Graham Parker's band and Paul Carrick on Thin Line Between Love and Hate. And then you get Robbie McIntosh and Malcolm Foster pretty much on the rest of the record. As serviceable as everyone is, I think it's really Chrissy's songs and her voice that, steal the show here. And that's the case on most Pretenders records. But her voice is in top form here. Her vibrato is just unmatched. It's my favorite female voice in rock. Just love the sound of her voice. And there's songs on here where she's like holding out notes and that vibrato is just wavering. And it's just, I don't know, something about it really gets to me. I love it. So yeah, a great, great record from the Pretenders. My number 4 is going to be A Walk Across the Rooftops by the Blue Nile, Scottish band. I think it's just so gorgeous, immaculately produced album. Paul Buchanan, the singer, also the guitarist, and allegedly was not a very good guitarist. So when they would be out playing gigs, he would not play much. So they ended up with this really unique sound of just super sparse, a lot of space in the mix. They're just a 3-piece too. So there's not a ton going on besides some like subtle synths, a lot of really cool bass work filling up the sound. It manages to be like minimal and incredibly lush at the same time. They're considered sophistopop, but I think it's rare to hear sophistopop with this much feeling and this much soul in it. They have a smooth sound, but it's not been smoothed over. I think there's a good amount of grit in their sound still on this record and in Paul Buchanan's voice. Robert Bell's bass playing, I think, is some of the best of '84 on this record. Sick tone as well. And I think it's a pretty immersive experience type of record that just kind of washes over you and completely envelops you. So that is my number 4. Number 3 is Mirror Moves by the Psychedelic Furs. After the departure of their drummer, the Furs were left as a trio, which I think is a fairly significant thing. It kind of alters their sound. There's only real drums, I think, on 2 tracks on the whole record. Here Comes Cowboys in Heaven. The rest of it's drum machine. And it's like a real 80s pop record because of that. It's much less rock than anything they previously did. It's kind of a softer record, and that point's kind of driven home by the opening Ghost in You. But I think the songwriting is so good. Lyrically, melodically, arrangement-wise, just really structurally sound songs. I believe both you and Cram put this as your number 4 in the Furs discography, which I think was severely underrating it. I think the songs are very, very strong. So 2 left. You know what they are? You should.
REM and Frankie Goes to Hollywood, I think.
No. One should be on your list. The other one probably not.
Metallica and Judas Priest.
No. The one that's not on your list, I feel safe saying, is Ocean Rain by Echo and the Bunnymen. Unless you've done a 180 on it. I believe in our video you said you never care to hear it again. So to me, it's the perfect Echo and the Bunnymen record. It perfects their sound, the marriage of post-punk and 60s psychedelia with strings and harpsichord and a 35-piece orchestra. There's a darkness to it, but it's not like an overwhelming darkness. It doesn't feel like I don't know, Joy Division or something. It feels mysterious and like cavernous, like the cover image, but it's also like accessible and strange at the same time. Production's great. It's one of Gil Norton's earliest records. I think it's his 3rd record. And the 2 he did before it, I'm not really that familiar with, so I don't really know what those were, but this is like his big first major thing. And the use of the orchestration on it is done so well. It's like very, very prominent, but also never really intrusive. It doesn't overwhelm the songs. It feels like it needs to be there at all times. And I think DeFreitas's drumming too is so good. It's really great part writing as a drummer. I think it's a great example of that. And the whole record, it just feels like a universe unto itself. So tons of killer songs too. Crystal Days, Killing Moon. Numero uno, my favorite album of the 80s and 1984. Heartbeat City by the Cars. The first Cars record not produced by Roy Thomas Baker, produced by John Mutt Lange. 6 singles, at least 4 of them were massive hits, radio staples to this day. In addition to those 6, It's Not the Night wasn't a single, but it reached 31 on the top rock tracks. Stranger Eyes was in Top Gun, but not on the soundtrack. Looking for Love was covered by Falco on his 1985 album, I think. So just about every song on this permeated pop culture in some way. Just a hugely successful record. And I've talked about it a bunch on the channel. We've kind of beat it to death. I just think it's one of the best sounding records of all time. Mutt Lange's production is pretty much perfect to me. I think it takes what he had done with Def Leppard and just like ups the ante and applies it to my ears to like cooler music. I think Rick Ocasek's songwriting is just still really sharp here. Drive is great. Ben Orr on vocals. I don't know. There's not a frequency out of place. Nothing, no instrument, no sound steps on any other sound's toes. Everything is just carved out perfectly. This record, the sound of this record is like a perfect sculpture to me. It's just everything in its right place. That's why it's my album of the decade.
Well, it's fine. It was going good. Top 5. takes a little step back for me. I don't particularly like the Blue Nile. I just don't get Blue Nile. Psychedelic Furs is fine. Echoes fine, but it's not a go-to for me. Um, Heartbeat City, obviously, all those singles are just incredible. So it was my 5, I think, last time in the 1984 album of the year. I'm sure that'll make it again. Overall, pretty solid list. Zero metal. That hurts. Just nothing. Maybe the greatest year ever for metal and nothing.
There's some metal songs on Neil's album, and um, Deep Purple's almost metal. Van Halen's almost metal.
They're close. There are some metal songs on 1984. Maybe it's close on Perfect Strangers. I don't know if anything was quite metal, so
How many in common? My official guess, I didn't say it in the video, but I posted it on Discord that I thought we'd have 11.
we have 11. I think.
Yeah. All right. Well, I probably know what they are because I guessed it.
I think so. Although I feel like you think I have one on here that I don't, so I'm not sure where the other one is.
Interesting.
Be interesting to see.
All right. Well, you're up next, so make sure you check back probably in the next day or two. That video will be dropping as well. Let us know what you think of my list. I'm sure people are confused by it. Hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. Check the video description for Patreon. You can support us over there if you like. And thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.